Salutations, everyone. I am, of course, Jose the Raccoon. Now, in this informative piece of content, I'll be giving an in-depth summary of one of my very favorite books, Child of God by Cormac McCarthy, as well as explaining the themes and morals of the book. And on top of all that, I'm going to be presenting it to you in a 100% family-friendly way, so you not only will not get demonetized on YouTube, but you can watch it with your kids or your boss's wife or your religious aunt. But first, we have to give a big thank you to today's sponsor, Dame Grover Industries Milk Bags. If you ever wanted to make a certain friend, cousin, ex-girlfriend, or politician we haven't paid off yet to be famous, well now you can have your face be on every milk carton, telephone pole, bulletin board, and convenience store front door in the state. Just call 313-935-0422 and have a team of specially trained endorsers will have their face plastered across as many states as you're willing to pay for. They have the standard one-state deal for only $1,000, the express $3,000 package that also get their faces across all the surrounding states, and if you use the promo code in the description, you can get 12% off a premium package and have your face across the entire continent of the United States for only $4,000, $399.99. So check the link in the description or click the link in the pinned comment for 12% off your first order, or call 313-935-0422 today. And now back to the video. The book starts out with a carnival of sorts, which is later revealed to be an auction for an old home. It then describes a man watching the auction unfold from a barn door, who is described as follows.
He is small, unclean, unshaven. He moves in the dry chaff among the dust and slats of sunlight with a constrained truculence. Saxon and Celtic bloods. A child of God, much like yourself, perhaps.
He watches the auction, and the auctioneer, a man named C.B., who is described as a man in a blue suit gesturing from a truck bed, bowing, pointing, and smiling. The auctioneer describes the property and the happenings of the small fair-like ordeal, preaching about the importance and the value of real estate, but a minute later, the murmuring of the interested crowd stops, and the auctioneer tells a man to get the sheriff. The man that was standing in the barn door is standing before the auctioneer now, holding a... The auctioneer squats down on the truck and asks, "What do you want, Lester?" To which a small, ill-shaven man responds,
"I done told you. I want you to get your goddamn worth of my property and take these fools with you."
The auctioneer responds to him, demanding Lester shut his mouth and stating that "these ladies present." They continue arguing, and the auctioneer reveals that this used to be this Lester fellow's former place of residence, but has since been repossessed, and that Lester was jailed once already for the matter. They continue to argue, with Lester threatening the auctioneer and the latter not budging, and even taunting the former, the chapter finishing with him saying,
"You want to shoot me, Lester? You can shoot me where I'm at. I ain't going nowheres for you."
Lester Ballard never could hold his head right after that. Must have throwed his neck out some way or another. I didn't see Buster hit him, but I seen him laying on the ground. I was with the sheriff. He was laying flat on the ground looking up at everybody with his eyes crossed and this awful pump knot on his head. He just lay there and he was bleeding at the ears. Buster was still standing there holding the axe. They took him on in the county car, and CB went on with the auction like nothing ever happened, but he did say it caused some of the folks not to bid that otherwise would have, which may have been what Lester set out at, I don't know. John Greer was from up in Granger County. Not saying nothing against him, but he was.
After that little bit of exposition, giving us through what I can only presume to be an interview with a random Appalachian townsperson, the scene opens by introducing John Kirby, who is the closest thing to a friend that Lester Ballard knows. Lester attempts to trade a pocket knife for Kirby for some but Kirby tells Lester that he hid the and now cannot find it. Now, you may notice that throughout the course of the summary, there are a lot of parts in the book where nothing really much happens, but I assure you that's intentional and is very important to the themes and overall moral of the book. Anyway, Lester then passes by what very little remains of a small, overgrown outhouse, then squats behind the remnants of a barn and goes poopy there instead, wiping his rear with a stick afterwards. He then goes into the abandoned house on the property and starts sweeping up and cleaning out all the garbage, old newspapers, animal dung, mud, and the other abandoned house stuff with a piece of cardboard. He then cleaned up the fireplace, wadded up those newspapers from before, and got a fire started in the hearth. Later that afternoon, Lester Ballard hauls an old rotten mattress to his new home, dropping it on the floor of the cabin. That night, he cooked some potatoes over the fire with a wire coat hanger, burning his mouth as he ate them, and finished off the night by rolling a cigarette and smoking it while reading the old news in the ancient newspapers. After his smoke, he stripped down to his socks and lay down on his new bedding and went to sleep.
I remember one thing he done one time. I was raised with him over in the 10th. I was ahead of him in school. He lost a softball down off the road that rolled down into this field about. It was way off down a bunch of briars and stuff, and he told this boy, this Finney boy, told him to go and get it. Finney boy was some bit younger than him and told him, said, "Go get that softball." Finney boy wouldn't do it. Lester walked up to him and said, "You better go get that ball." Finney boy said he wasn't about to do it. And Lester told him one more time, said, "You don't get off down in there and get me that ball, I'm gonna bust you in the mouth." That Finney boy was scared, but he faced up to him, told him he hadn't thrown it off down in there. Well, we was standing there the way you will. Ballard could have let it go. He seen the boy wasn't going to do what he asked him. He just stood there a minute and then punched him in the face. Flew out the Finney boy's nose and he sat down the road. Just for a minute and he got up. Somebody gave him a kerchief and he put up to his nose. He was swole up and bleeding. The Finney boy just looked at Lester Ballard and went on up the road. I know what it was. We just felt real bad. I never liked Lester Ballard from that day. I never liked him much before that. He never done nothing to me.
Okay. The next page begins with Lester laying in the grass at night at a place called the Frog Mountain Turnaround, peeping into a parked car. He then sneaks up on the truck, listening to the radio and the moans of the woman inside. The car began to rock gently, and Lester peeked up to see two white legs sprawled up and a black man thrusting away. In reaction to seeing a black man, Lester only says, "It's a hard," and watches the scene unfold and listening to the woman moan the name Bobby over and over again. The unbuttoned Lester spends himself under fender, catching the attention of the woman. Lester drops the hard R again and then ducks down in the grass. The radio's turned off and the car door opened. Lester scuttled away over the garbage that littered the turnaround with a man shouting, "You better run, you son of a biscuit." Lester then escaped into the night and the car started up and drove off.
I don't know. They say he never was right after his daddy killed himself. It was just the one boy. The mother had run off. I don't know where to or who with. Me and Cecil Edwards was the ones cut him down. He come in the store and told it like you'd tell it was raining out. We went up there and walked in the barn, and I seen his feet hanging. We just cut him down and let him fall on the floor, just like cutting down meat. He stood there and watched and never said nothing. He was about 9 or 10-year-old at the time. The old man's eyes was run out on stems like a crawfish and his tongue blacker than a chow dog's. I wished if a man wanted to turn into a himself, he'd do it with poison or something so folks wouldn't have to see such thing as that.
He didn't look so pretty yourself when Greer got done with him.
No, but I don't mind honest. I'd rather see that than eyeballs hanging out and such.
I'll tell you what old Gresham done to his wife. And how crazy he was. They buried her up here at 6 Mile, and the preacher, he said a few words, and they called on Gresham, asked him did he want to say a few words before they threw the dirt over her, and old Gresham, he stood up, had his hat in his hand and all. Stood up there and sung the chicken blues. The chicken blues. No, I don't know the words to it, but he did, and he sung them every one before he sat back down again. But he wasn't a patch on Lester Ballard for crazy.
Back at the cabin, Lester laid there in the night, plugging his ears to block out the sounds of the crickets. Something scampered into the room and vaulted out the window. He then heard the wails of foxhounds coming up the valley, and soon they trampled into the yard. Lester, standing there naked, illuminated by the starlight, saw a pack of dogs running through the doorway. They filled the room, circling and howling. The hounds then swept out of the window one by one, knocking out what little left of it was there, leaving it as nothing but a square hole in the wall. 2 more came in as Lester stood there cursing, and he kicked one with his bare foot. A final hound entered the room as he hopped around on one foot, shrieking, and he fell upon it, seizing it by its hind leg. Ballard flared blindly at it with his fist as it howled pitifully. Later, Lester's going up a road through the Quarry Woods, then he aims his at a bird. But a strange, unexplainable feeling made him hold, and the bird flies away. Lester would lower the hammer on his and continue up the road. He enters into the dump and walks past heaps of old refuse infested with various junkyard cats. He points his at a large tomcat and says bang, but the cat shows no interest and just stares at him like he's an idiot. Lester spits on it and keeps walking. The book describes how the dump keeper had spawned 9 daughters. He named them with words he plucked from an old medical dictionary, such as urethra, cerebella, and hernia sue. They would sit around all day, hairy and unwashed, on tires and old chairs and crates. They would bring home boys so often that the junkyard keeper would go out at night and fire at random just to clear the air. He couldn't keep track of the girls' ages and had no idea whether or not they should go out with boys in the first place. They would come and go in all hours in their boyfriends' trashy cars, which is so eloquently described as motorized convertibles, and eventually they would fall pregnant one by one. To this, he would beat them, but much to the dismay of his wife. The summer saw 3 births. The house filled up with people sleeping everywhere. One brought home what she said was a husband, but he only stayed a day or 2, and then nobody ever saw him again. The 12-year-old began to swell up too. One day in the woods, he came across 2 figures and watched them until he realized one of the figures was one of his daughters. He tried to creep up on them, but the boy noticed and hopped away. He began to beat his daughter with the stick he carried, and she tripped him in the commotion. The both of them sprawled out. Because of the stench of the act that was taking place, the air was electric, and soon enough he started to After committing crimes against anything and everything, the dump keeper pulled his pants up and lumbered toward the dump and met with Lester. They would sit on an old bloated couch and drink fermented grain while eating a raw potato. Bell would have his eye out for one of the old man's daughters that would sit in an old oil drum and flash her underwear at people and laugh. Lester goes up to her and the man she's sitting with on the drum and tries to get her to show him her chest, but she's unwilling to do so for anything less than a quarter. She teases him for a while, then walks off to do laundry. Later, Lester would come to a church and sit on the rear pew, garnering the attention of the congregation, whispering amongst each other, even causing the preacher to pause his sermon. Lester would pour himself some water, and the sermon would resume, just with Lester sniffling sickly throughout it. When summer came, Lester would go from pool to pool looking for bass, as he'd been subsisting off stolen corn, plants, and the occasional frog. He found a nice one. He went back to his cabin to get his but when he looks into the water to aim at the fish, he notices the water is muddy now, and he sees a farmer by the name of Waldrop's cattle upstream. So he aimed his at the cattle and fired, watching it struggle.
I'll tell you another thing he did one time. He had this old cow to balk on him, couldn't get her to do nothing. He pushed and pulled and beat her till she'd worn him out. He went and borrowed Squire Helton's tractor and threw the rope over the old cow's head and took up the slack it like to have jerked her head plumb off. Broke her neck and killed her where she stood. Asked Floyd if he didn't. I don't know what he had on Waldrop. The Waldrop would never run him off. Even after he burnt his old place down, he never said nothing to him about it that I know of. That reminds me of that Trantham boy. Had them old-timey oxes over at the fair and wouldn't go till finally he took and built a fire underneath of them. The old foxes looked down and seen it and took about 5 steps and quit again. Trantham boy looked, and there set the fire up under the wagon and commenced beating at the fire with his hat, and about that time them old oxes took off again. Drug the wagon over him and like to broke both his legs. You never seen more contrary beasts than them was.
The dump keeper told Lester to come up, a request that didn't need to be made as Lester was coming anyway. "Howdy, Rubo," Lester said to the dump keeper. They sat down on the sofa, Reuben holding his stick and Lester holding his They talk about shooting ranch and Reuben's daughters. Lester gets up and heads out, walking past the rusted-out vehicles and other junk. He would do a little scrounging around for useful items, finding an old kitchen knife. The book describes the weather turning to autumn, with winter coming in soon. Lester raised around, doing all as usual, squatting by the side of the road, holding a cursing and spitting at cars as they drove by. One cold morning at the Frog Mountain turnaround, Lester would stumble upon a lady wearing a white gown, sleeping in the middle of the woods, all disheveled and covered in leaves. After watching her for a while to see if she was he tosses a couple rocks at her just to check, one of which touches her leg, stirring her awake. He walks over and kneels down and touches her. She sits up and opens her eyes, which are gorged with red stuff that comes out when you mash up your his head against the brick wall. She smelled of fermented grain and rot, and she snarled at Lester before saying to him, "What do you want, you son of a biscuit?" Lester responds, "Ain't you cold?" To which she responds, "What the hell is it to you?" So Lester replies, "It ain't a thing to me." Ballard stands above her, still holding his and asks her, "Where's your clothes at?" The woman attempts to stand up, but promptly falls back down and calls Lester a son of a biscuit. Wobbling around, she then spied a rock and prepared to strike him with it. Lester tells her to put the rock down, to which she tells him, "You make me." She drew the rock back and stepped forward, striking him in the chest. She then covered her face with her hands, and Lester in the face so hard it spun her around 360 degrees. She says, "I knowed you'd do me this way." Ballard then checked his chest for bodily fluid, and upon seeing that there was none, he grabbed one of the straps to her gown and yanked it, ripping off her clothes, much to her dismay. She fell down to the frosty forest floor, and Lester walked off with a ripped gown under his arm, while the now unclothed woman sat on the ground, screaming various names at him, none of which were his.
Fate's alright. It's plain spoken, but I like him. I've rode with him a lot of times. I remember one night up in the Frog Mountain at the turnaround there was a car parked up there, and Fate put the lights on him and walked on up there. The old boy in the car was all, "Yes, sir," "No, sir," and had this girl with him. He asked the old boy for his license, and the old boy scratched around for the longest time, couldn't find his pocketbook nor nothing. Fate finally told him, said, "Step out here." Said the old girl was sitting there as wise as a sheep. Well, the old boy opened the door, and out he steps. Fate looked at him, and then he hollered at me. He said, "John, come out here to see this." I went on up there, and the old boy's standing by the side of the car looking down. The sheriff's looking down, got the light on him. We're all standing there looking down at this old boy, and he's got his britches on inside out, pockets hanging outside and all around. Looked crazier than hell. Sheriff just told him to go on, asked him if he could drive like that. That's the kind of feller he is.
Lester walks out into the front yard and sees a thin man with a collapsed jaw squatting in the front yard waiting for him. So Lester says, "What say, Doffuzzle?" To which the man responds, "What say, Lester?" in his jarbled voice, which sounds like he has a mouthful of marbles, as his original jawbone has been cut away and replaced with a goat's. They squat around like constipated vultures, and the man tells Lester about how the disoriented girl that he met in the woods went to the sheriff, accusing him of rape. The man then spits, as is typical, and gets up and walks away. The story then transfers to the sheriff of Sevier County walking out of the courthouse in the town. He rolls a cigarette, talks to some people, and gets into a car to drive off to Lester's shack. The car parks a quarter-mile away from the cabin, and he treads through the sheer wall of dried briars and weeds on the way to the cabin, all while Lester watches him do so. When he arrived at the porch of the cabin, his chinos were dusty and covered in weeds. "Let's go," said the sheriff. "Where to?" said Ballard. "You better get your butt down off of that porch," the sheriff said. Ballard spat, put his hands in the rear pockets of his jeans, and stepped off the porch. "You got it all," he said. "Man of leisure like yourself, you oughtn't to mind helping us workers unscramble a little misunderstanding. This way, mister," said the sheriff, to which Ballard responded, "This way. There's a path if you don't know it." Ballard sits in a swivel chair in the Sevier County jail, and the deputy comes in with a woman behind him. When she sees Lester, she starts to laugh. The sheriff then gets up from his desk and says to the deputy, "Close the door, Cotton." "This son of a biscuit here. Where the hell did you find him at?" said the woman. "Is he not the one?" "Well, yes, he's the one. It's the other two sons of biscuits I want jailed. This son of a biscuit here," the woman says, showing up her hands in disgust. "Did you not want to make a charge against this man or not?" "Yes, I do," the woman said. "What do you want to charge him with?" "By God," she said, causing Lester to laugh woodenly. "Assault and battery, too, you son of a biscuit," she added. "She ain't nothing but a guard, old gore." The old gore Ballard's mouth. Ballard came up from the swivel chair and began to dead frog. They grappled, falling over and rolling around, knocking stuff over until the deputy grabbed Lester's arm, to which Ballard snarls, "You guard, son of a biscuit." The officers managed to detain the two unruly individuals, but not before the woman rears her foot back and does what you do to assault your boy. Lester in the face. Ballard on the ground, almost crying, just says, "You sons of biscuits, just guard, all of you." Lester spends 9 days and 9 nights in the Sevier County jail, but he enjoyed the food, so it wasn't that bad overall. Until a black man was brought in the cell opposite Lester's. After a day or two, Lester started to converse with the man of African heritage, asking his name, to which he replies with Edward John. Lester then asks where he's from and asks John to confirm if he's a fugitive or not, to which John says he's from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and he's a fugitive from the ways of this world, and he'd be a fugitive from his mind if he had some snow. Lester then asks what he's in for, to which John states, "I cut a motherfucker's head off with a pocket knife." Lester waited for a while to be asked what he was in for, but never was, so he just sat on his own accord. I was supposed to have this girl. She was nothing but a to start with. To which John replied, "What is nothing but trouble?" To which Lester agreed, guessing he thought that way, but never heard it articulated that way. John then sits back on his cot and croons, "Flying home, fly like a motherfucker, flying home." Lester then says, "All the trouble I ever was in was caused by the women or both." To which John replied, "All the trouble I ever was in was caused by getting caught." After a week, the sheriff came and took John away, the latter singing, "Flying home." The sheriff then replies, "You'll be flying all right, home to your maker." John just keeps singing, "Fly like a motherfucker." Lester calls out to him, "Take it easy," to which John doesn't respond. The next day, the sheriff comes and stops in front of Ballard's cell, takes a piece of straw out of his teeth, and asks Lester, "Where was that woman from?" Which Lester responds, "What woman?" "One you says the sheriff. "You mean that old Lester says. "All right, that old the sheriff replies. "I don't know. How the would I know where she was from?" "Was she from Sevier County?" "I don't know. The sheriff just looked at him, put the straw back in his mouth, and walked away. The next day, the turnkey and bailiff came and took Lester from his cell, bringing him to an empty room. He sat there for around an hour, listening to muffled legal proceedings from the other side of the room, until the bailiff came in and beckoned Lester into the courtroom. Shortly after, Lester was let go and walked out of the courthouse. He walked up the street, and the sheriff walked up to him and asked, "What's your plans now?" To which Lester says, "Go home." The sheriff, suspect of Ballard's intentions, probes him, asking what Lester plans to do next, but Lester states that he has no plans but to go home.
He had that from when he was just almost a boy. He worked for old man Whaley setting fence posts at 8 cents a post to buy it. Told me he quit mid-morning right in the middle of the field the day he got enough money for it, but I think it come to over 700 posts. I say one thing, he could buy guys it, hit anything he could see. I seen him a spider out of a web in the top of a big red oak one time, and we was far from the tree as from here to the road yonder. They run him off out at the fair one time, wouldn't let him it no more. I remember back a couple of years talking about fairs, they had an old boy come through with live pigeons with you. Him and on you with or anything else. He must have had a truckload of pigeons. Had a boy out in the middle of a field with a crate full, and he'd holler, and the boy'd let one slip, and he'd raise and blam, he'd dust it. Misters, he could strictly make the feathers fly. We never seen the like of shooting. They was a bunch of us pretty hot-shot bird hunters lost our money out there before we got figured out. What he was doing, this boy was blowing the old pigeons up the to them with firecrackers. They'd take off like they was home free and get up about so high, and blam, it'd blow their butts out. He just directly seen the feathers fly. You couldn't tell it. Or I take that back. Somebody did finally. I don't remember who it was. Reached and grabbed the out of the old boy's hand before he could and the old pigeon just went blam anyways. They like to tarred and feathered him over it. That reminds me of this carnival they had up in Newport one time. There was a fella up there that had this ape or gorilla, ever what it was, stood about so high. It was not tall as Jimmy yonder. They had it to where you could put on boxing gloves, get in this ring with it, and you could stay in there with him for 3 minutes, they'd give you $50. Well, these old boys I was with, they kept at me and kept at me. I had this little old gal in my arm kept looking up at me like a poleaxed calf. These old boys egging me on. I think we drunk a little too, I disremember. Anyways, I got studying this here ape, and I thought, well, he ain't as big as me. They had him up there on a chain. I remember he was sitting on a stool eating a head of red cabbage. Directly I said, raised my old hand and told the feller I'd try it one time. Well, they got us back there and got the gloves on me and all. And this fella that owned the ape, he told me, said, "Now don't hit him too hard out there, 'cause if you do, you'll make him mad and you'll be in some real trouble." I thought to myself, well, he's trying to save his ape a whipping is what he's trying to do, trying to protect his investment. Anyways, I come out and climbed in the ring there. Felt pretty much a fool, all my buddies out there hollering and going on, and I looked down at this little gal I was with and give her a big wink, and about that time they brought the old ape out. I had a muzzle on him. He kindly looked me over. Well, they called out our names and everything. I forgot what the old ape's name was, and this old boy rung a big dinner bell, and I stepped out and circled the old ape. Showed him a little footwork there. He didn't look like he was going to do nothing much, so I reached out and busted him one. He just kindly looked at me. Well, I didn't do nothing but square off and hit him again. Popped him right in the side of the head. When I done that, his old head jerked back and his eyes went kindly funny, and I said, well, how sweet it is. I done spent the $50. I ducked around and went to hit him again. About that time, he jumped right on top of my head and crammed his foot in my mouth, and like to tore my jaw off. I couldn't even holler for help. I thought they never would get that thing off me.
Speaking of fairs, that's what Lester's next. He walks around the fairgrounds, peering at all the different stands and people walking by. Lester first plays that one game where you have to hook different fish with numbers on the bottom of them. He would pull them out and study the numbers on each one until he got accused of cheating and told to go away. He follows the sound of fire and arrives at a stand with mechanical ducks tottering and creaking as fire off. He steps up and asks what you can win, to which the Connie points to rows of stuffed animals of different sizes. Lester asks what he has to do to get the big prizes, and the Connie points to a small card with a red dot in the middle and tells him that if he can put out the red dot, that he can get a prize. Ballard puts 3 dimes on the counter, is given back a nickel, and uses the card 5 times. He asks for the large teddy bear, but the Connie tells him that all of the red must be removed from the card to win. Upon further examination, Lester notices the smallest shred of red lint along the edge of the hole made in the card. Ballard angrily pays again and wins this time, winning a mohair teddy bear. Lester would continue to win a tiger and another teddy bear, as well as the attention of the crowd, but would be told by the Connie that he can't play anymore. Lester tries to protest, but the Connie ignores him, so he just walks off with his prizes as the fairground starts to set off fireworks. The next page just describes some basic everyday activities for Lester, such as keeping his fireplace burning, cleaning his and eating, while his new toys watch with their beady eyes. Later, he watches some hunting dogs chase down an injured boar, and 2 figures head down to the visceral scene that unfolded between the animals. Later, Lester walks into a blacksmith shop holding a rusty axe head he found. He tells the smith to sharpen it, and the blacksmith tells him he'll show him how to dress an axe better than any new axe you could buy at the hardware store. He then goes into as much care and detail, reforging the rusty axe head into something usable. The smith stuck the axe in the fire and gave the crank a few turns. Yellow flames spat out from under the blade. They watched.
You want to keep your fire high, said the smith. 3 or 4 inches above the toy iron. You want to lay a clean fire with a good coal. Let's not lay it out in the sun.
He turned the axe head with his tongs.
You want to take your first heat at a good yellow and work down. Yeah, that ain't hard enough.
He had raised his voice to make these observations, although the forge made no sound. He cranked the lever again, and they watched the fire spit.
Not too fast, said the smith. Slow, that's how you heat. Watch the colors. If she chances to get white, she's ruined. There she comes now.
He drew the axe head from the fire and swung it all quivering with heat and glowing a translucent yellow and laid it on the anvil.
Now mind how you work only the flats, he said, taking up his hammer, and start on the bit.
He swung the hammer and the soft steel gave Anya the blow with an odd dull ring. He hammered out the bit on both sides and put the blade back in the fire.
We take another heat on her, only not so high this time. A high red color will do it.
He laid the tongs on the anvil and passed both palms down hard over his apron, his eyes on the fire.
Watch her well, he said. Never leave steel in the fire for longer than it takes to heat. Some people will poke around at something else and leave the tool the heat and the perdition, but the proper thing is to fetch her out the minute she shows the color of grace. Now we want a high red. Now here she comes.
He tongued the axe head to the anvil again, the bit a deep orange color with pins of bright heat breaking on it.
See now, do you hammer her back from the bit on the second heat?
The hammer striking with that sound not quite metallic.
About an inch back. See how she flares. Let her get wide as a shovel if it takes, but never lay your hammer to the edges or you'll take out the muscle you put in on the flats.
He hammered steady and effortless, the bit cooling until the light of it faded into a faintly pulsing
red bodily fluid
color. Ballard glanced around the shop. The smith laid on the bit on the hardy and with a sledge clipped off the flared edges.
That's how we take the width down, he said. Now one more heat to make her tough.
He placed the blade in the fire and cranked the handle.
We'll just take a low heat this time, he said. Just for a minute, just so you can see a shine will do. There she is. Now hammer her down both sides real good.
He beat with short strokes. He turned her head and worked the other side.
See how black she gets, he said. Black and shiny like a
hard word.
Yep, that packs of steel and makes it tough. Now she's ready to harden.
They waited while the axe heated. The smith took a splayed cigar stub from his apron pocket and lit it with a coal from the forge.
We just want to heat it the part we've worked, he said. And the lower heat you can harden at, the better she'll be. Just a low cherry red is about right. Some people want to quench in oil, but water tempers at a lower heat. A little salt to soften the water. Soft water, hard steel. Now she comes and straight down this way."
He lowered the quaking blade into the quench bucket and a ball of steam rose. The metal hissed for an instant and was quiet. The smith dunked it up and down.
"Cool it slow and it won't crack," he said. "Now we'll polish it and draw the temper."
He brightened its bit with a stick wrapped in emery cloth. Holding the head in the tongs, he began to move it slowly back and forth over the fire.
"Keep her out of the fire and keep 'em moving. That way she'll draw down even. Now she's getting yellow. That's fine for some tools, but we going to take a blue temper on her. Now she gets brown. Watch it now. See it there?"
He took the axe head from the fire and laid it on the anvil.
"You got to watch it close and not let the temper run out on the corners first. Shape your fire for the job always."
Is that it?
Said Ballard.
"That's it. We'll just fix your handle now and sharpen her and you'll be on your way."
Ballard nodded.
"It's like a lot of things,"
Said the smith.
"Do the least part of it wrong and you just as well to do it all wrong."
He was sorting through the handles standing in a barrel.
"Reckon you could do it now from watching?"
He said.
Do what?
Said Ballard. The next page describes Lester running and jumping through thigh-high snow, in hand, chasing after some rabbit tracks in the mountain woods. He enters a glade, causing some robins to fly off. He lunges after a group of them, catching one in his hands. After doing so, he heads to an acquaintance's house and is greeted by a woman, but is more focused on the daughter. Lester says, "I brung him a play pretty," nodding to the thing. He holds out the terrified robin, and the woman says, "Looky here, Billy."
It didn't look. A huge-headed, bald, and slobbering primate that inhabited the lower reaches of the house, familiar of the warped floorboards and the holes tucked up with food tins hammered flat, a consort of roaches and great hairy spiders in their season, perennially bestiated and afflicted with a nameless crud.
Lester drops the bird onto the floor, and it scampers away from the large, bestial child in terror, but Lester catches it again and hands it to the imbecile. Lester talks with the woman and harasses the daughter for a bit before the latter calls attention to the child, which is sitting there on the floor chewing, its mouth stained with
red bodily fluid.
It had chewed the bird's legs off.
There wasn't none of 'em any account that I ever heard of. I remember his granddaddy, name was Leland. He was getting a war pension as old man. Back in the late 20s. Was supposed to have been in the Union Army. It was a known fact that he didn't do nothing the whole war but scout the bushes. They come looking for him 2 or 3 times. He never did go to war. Old man Cameron tells this, and I don't know what cause he'd have to lie. Said they come out there to get Leland Ballard, and while they was hunting him in the barn and smokehouse and all, he slipped down out of the bushes to where the horses was at and cut the leather off the sergeant's saddle to half-sole his shoes with. No, I don't know how he got that pension. Lied to him, I reckon. Sevier County put more men in the Union Army that had registered voters, but he wasn't one of 'em. He was the only one that brass enough to ask for a pension. I'll tell you one thing he was, if he wasn't no soldier, he was a by-guy whitecap.
Oh, yes, he was that. And a younger brother was one, too, that run off from here about that time. It's a known fact he was hanged in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Goes to show it ain't just the place. He'd have been hanged no matter where he lived. I'll say one thing about Lester, though. You can trace him back to Adam if you want, and goddamn if he didn't outstrip 'em all.
That's the God's truth.
You all talk about him. I got supper waiting on me at the house.
On a cold winter morning in December, when heading back home after squirrel hunting, he noticed a car idling at the Frog Mountain turnaround. After observing it for a while to make sure there was nobody inside, he decided to walk by and peer into the windows. He didn't see anybody in the front seat, but in the back seat there were 2 people sprawled out half naked. He just notices one of the eyes staring lifelessly and decides to investigate the inside of the car, then realizes that the 2 lovers are no longer amongst the living. But after seeing the half-naked, lifeless woman, he can't help himself and begins stroking her with his thumb. He then pulls the deceased man off the woman down onto the car floor, closes the girl's eyes, and sniffs her panties, putting them in his pocket afterwards. Then, after some hesitation, he begins thrusting away into the cold woman, telling the empty husk everything he'd ever thought of saying to a woman. After finishing, he wipes himself off on the girl's skirt, then begins walking away, before coming back numerous times for different purposes. First, to grab the squirrels he forgot and start the car. Then, to take the valuables from the unfortunates in the back seat, coming out with $20 and some coins, some makeup, a flashlight, and 2/3 of a bottle of
Fermented grain.
Finally, he heads back one last time. He arrives home with the deceased girl after dragging her through the woods all day, drops her onto his mattress, and covers her. After getting his fireplace started, he removes the clothes from her and admires her body, even going outside to peep at her laying stiff on the mattress. He then heads back inside, unbuckles, and pulls the sheets over the both of them. Later, Lester would...
Hey, you got any money?
No, go away, you dirty communist.
No, please, sir. I just need some money.
No way, you frickin' pinko.
Give me your
Freaky,
money.
I'm gonna eat your face, you dirty
freaky,
communist. I'm gonna eat your throat out. Ow! Oh, my head. Oh, my balls. My balls. Wait, so if you're Russian, what are you doing in Minnesota?
I was sent back here in 1990 to covertly influence the minds of the capitalist scum and spark a communist revolution from within the country.
And how's that going for you? You have fun stumbling around, you drunken pinko. Anyway, after checking the turnaround the next day and seeing the car still there, Lester spits, obviously, and heads back home. The next morning, while laying in bed, the girl in the other room, away from the heat for keeping, 2 hunter boys enter the house, and Lester howls at them to get out and go away, which they do. He then stood in the doorway to see if the hunters could have seen the girl, and realized he was uncertain if they had. So, he puts up a jury-rigged ladder into the dusty attic and cleared some space up there. Then, after failing to drag her heavy body up there by hand, he ties a rope around her and pulls her up into the attic. Later, after eating some squirrel stew, he walks alongside the road for 3 hours before making it to town. Well, yeah, he spies a red dress in the window and decides to buy it with some underwear to go along for his new girlfriend. Afterwards, he buys some groceries from a store owner named Mr. Fox. Also, can I tangent here? I hate foxes. I don't want to be racist, but us coons, as y'all say, are just so much better. Foxes are red and orange, sure. And, they're like, oh, we're classy, we're better than you. No, we're not. No, you're not. You're
freaky,
pigs. Sorry, I'm not sorry about what I said. I'm just sorry for tangenting. Anyway, after getting home, it begins snowing outside, and then he starts making dinner and coffee on the fire. Then, he drags down the stiff girl from the attic. He tries to undress her, but she's frozen solid and can't move any part of her without her whole body moving too. So, he leaves her to thaw out by the fireplace. When she was finally no longer frozen, he dressed her in the new clothes he bought her, brushed her hair, and put some makeup on her. Then, he arranged her in different positions and stared at her through the windows. After a while, he'd sit there and spoon her body, eventually undressing her and then doing the dirty with her. After wrapping her up in rags and hauling her body, her bones laying loose in her flesh, back into the attic, Lister goes to sleep in the freezing cold, needing to keep the fire extra fed to keep warm. Later, he wakes up with a bad feeling, quickly realizing the room is full of smoke. He looked up through the ceiling boards and saw this hellish orange glow of the fire above. He grabbed his and ran outside, seeing the shack engulfed in flames. He ran back into the shack, grabbing his belongings bit by bit, repeatedly dropping them into the snow and running back in to grab more. He manages to get most of his stuff, such as cookware, and other stuff. But when he ran back inside to try and pull the girl's body out of the attic, he couldn't push into the burning heat of the furnace that was once the freezing cold attic. So, he rushes out with his stuffed animals he got from the fair instead. Standing out in the snowfall, watching his home burn to the ground, Lester can do nothing but stare as the wall of flames warming everything around tears home to the foundation. The house was nothing but a smoldering ruin long before morning, leaving Lester to silently perch upon the ashes like an owl for what warmth was left. Lester would put his mattress on the ashes of the house and slept with snowflakes melting on him as he lay in the open. When he woke in the morning, the melted snow had frozen, covering him in a glass-like layer of ice. He shambles to the remains of the hearth, trying to warm himself. He would spend the next few hours picking through the smoldering remains of the house with a stick, but couldn't find so much as a bone left of the girl, causing him to give up and pack his things. He heads up the mountain and makes it to a cave entrance, making multiple trips to relocate all his stuff. He would start up the remnants of an old fire underneath a hole in the roof of the cave. With the weather unchanging, Lester took to wandering around, stalking his original home and his new owner, John Greer. He would watch in dark places, watching Greer perform everyday tasks. Lester would put Greer in the sights of his and say, bang. Lester would later come to the dump to visit, listening to the dump keeper complain about marriage and young people, Lester telling him about how his cabin burned down. The next day, Ballard stumbles into John Greer, who asks, "You're Ballard, ain't you?" To which he responds, "No, I ain't him." Later, he would meet up with Kirby, who tells Lester that he got caught selling
fermented grain,
and is now on 3-year probation. Later, Lester would return to the house where the idiot child lived, finding only the daughter and the idiot to be there at the time. Ballard stands in the open door frame, a sickish smile on his face, trying to make awkward small talk with the girl while she treats him with utter indifference. When the girl reluctantly invites Ballard in, he kneels down by the idiot and pats it on its near bald head. Ballard then walks over to the stove and comments how the idiot could easily knock over the chicken wire enclosed furnace. Then he looks at the girl and accuses the idiot of being her child, causing her to snap back in anger, calling Lester crazy, a liar, and threatening to tell her daddy on him. Lester then tells the girl to show him her,
Not yours.
to which the girl stands up and demands Ballard get out immediately, to which he grumpily obliges. He then walks out to the woods, picks up his
Pew, pew,
and sneaks back to the house. He aims his
pew, pew,
at her through the window and fires. He narrowly misses her head due to her getting up right as he
pew.
so he levers in another cartridge and rushes into the house, where he sees her bleeding out on the floor. He tells her to
Don't believe me.
and she does. After she had stopped moving, Ballard scrambled around the house, gathering up newspapers and magazines, all while the idiot watches silently. Ballard rips the chicken wire off the stove, kicks it over, and piles the shredded papers into the knocked-over furnace. Once the fire got started, Ballard picks up the
No longer leave me.
girl onto his shoulder, grabs his rifle, and takes one last look at the burning interior as the idiot sits there oblivious. Later, while walking up the road, Ballard is pulled over by the sheriff and arrested. After being brought in and questioned whether or not he burned the house down, Lester just says, "Nah," and you tell him, "Mr. Ballard, you're either going to have to find some other way to live or some other place in the world to do it in." Ignoring this advice, Lester enters Mr. Fox's store and picks out some groceries. But when Mr. Fox says the total, Lester tells him to put it on his tab, to which Mr. Fox asks when Mr. Ballard is going to pay him back, telling him that he already owes $34.19. Lester propositions paying $4.19 to make it an even 30, making Mr. Fox ask how old Lester is. Ballard states that he's 27, and Mr. Fox asks him, "And in 27 years, you managed to accumulate $4.19. Ballard asks him what he's getting at, and Mr. Fox tells him, "According to my figures, at this rate, it's going to take 194 years to pay out the $30, Ballard. I'm 67 now." Ballard says, "Why, that's crazy." To which Mr. Fox says, "Of course, this is figured if you don't buy nothing else." He then tells Ballard that, to minimize his losses, he suggests that if Ballard only has $4.19, then he should only buy $4.19 worth of groceries. Lester refuses to put anything back and angrily pays for all the groceries. Later, Ballard hikes through the snowy mountain woods and arrives at the store where he sells some old wristwatches to a group of boys, getting $8 for the 3 of them. When Ballard returned to his cave, it was already dark. He got his fireplace started up again, grabbed his flashlight, and headed down a narrow cavern. He treks down further into the wet cave, balancing over pools of water, crawling under low passages, and climbing up rock faces. He arrives at a bell-shaped cavern with various stone ledges where the bodies of Lester's victims lay. Ballard crept through the disorderly woods.
If given charge, Lester would have made things more orderly in the woods and in men's souls.
He makes his way to Greer's house and breaks into his chicken coop. He snatches up handfuls of dried corn, filling his pockets with them. Then he tries to grabbing a chicken, but it runs away and he has to chase it. He grabs one by the tail and then by the neck. He wrings out its neck, then snatches as many eggs as he can and leaves. Relatable. Ballard would continue to stalk what was once his home, watching Greer do his daily activities, such as feeding the chickens or going to the barn or bringing firewood inside. Ballard would wander around the woods, rambling to himself and making plans. He'd long been wearing the underclothes of his female victims, but now he took to appearing in their outerwear as well. A gothic doll in ill-fit clothes, she would continue to wander around the woods, with the advent of warmer weather awakening swarms of bats from deeper within his cave. Chapter 3 begins with the sheriff and his deputy driving up the mountain near the turnaround, then getting out of their car and looking down into a ravine where an overturned car lay at the bottom. When they go down to investigate, you don't find anything substantial, even after thorough investigation. The deputy wonders where the occupants of the car, a missing couple, went, but the sheriff tells him that they weren't in the car and that it was most likely pushed down into the ravine. The next page cuts to Ballard sneaking up on a pickup truck with his... He opens it up its door, shining his flashlight on the boy and its girl inside. He demands to see the boy's driver license, to which the boy retorts that Ballard isn't the law, but Ballard says, "I'll be the judge of that," and demands to know what they're doing. They say they were doing nothing, but Ballard says, "You was fixing the screw, wasn't you?" Causing the boy to threaten to make Ballard shut his mouth, to which Ballard responds, "Anytime you feel froggy, jump." The boy then reaches over and tries to start the ignition, but the engine does not start. The boy then resorts to trying to grab the barrel of the but Ballard shoots him through the neck, dropping him sideways onto the girl's lap. Ballard then rambles to the girl.
I told that fool, didn't I tell him? I don't know why people don't want to listen.
The girl puts her hands up, and Ballard demands that she get out of the truck. She reluctantly gets out. Ballard makes her turn around, puts her to the base of her skull, and shoots. He then drags her limp body into the woods, barely off the road, and throws himself on her body. But as he's getting down and dirty, he hears the truck start, causing him to jump up and gasp with terror. He then charges through the woods and chases after the truck as it drives off down the direct gravel road. Despite his best efforts, he runs out of breath and can't run no more. He states that you won't get far, you
Don't lost your life,
son of a
biscuit.
and realizes he left his back up the mountain. He makes his way back up the mountain and grabs his and carries up the
Don't lost your life.
girl up the mountain. Ballard squatted at the top of the mountain, watching the creek below him, which had flooded after 3 days of rain. At night, the side of the mountain would be dotted with lamps and torches, with Ballard passing under them in the dark through stone tunnels within the mountain. When morning came, he crawled out of a hole and hauled his blanket load of items with him. He would head down to the creek, carrying a crate of miscellany, men's and women's clothes, and the 3 enormous stuffed toys. Ballard would shamble through the... There's a fire down there. What? Ballard would shamble through the flooded creek, the brown water rising up to his legs, to his knees, to his waist, up his chest. He looked up the creek and saw a log coming down the water. He yelled, "Get!" at it, as if hoping to order the inanimate hunk of wood to move, but it did not. It struck him, causing him to drop the crate of his belongings into the water while he hooked his arm over the log, clutching onto it. He screamed and tried to stay afloat on the logs that swept downriver until the log rolled over and he was swallowed by the water.
He came up flailing and sputtering and began to thrash his way toward the line of willows that marked the submerged creek bank. He could not swim, but how would you drown him? His wrath seemed to buoy him up. Some halt in the way of things seems to work here. See him. You could say that he's sustained by his fellow men like you, his people to soar with them calling to him. A race that gives suck to the maimed and the crazed, that wants their wrong blood in its history and will have it. But they want this man's life. He heard them in the night, seeking him with lanterns and cries of execration. How then is he borne up? Or rather, why will not these waters take him?
Ballard would eventually pull himself up to the other end of the creek and stand up in the shallow water. He cleaned down his cartridges, then went looking for his stuff. Alas, all he could recover was the crate, which was empty. He thought he may have seen his stuffed animals downstream, but they were gone. He then went further up the mountain, spending the whole night taking trips relocating his stuff to a new cave. By the time he finished dragging their last rancid, moldy
Lifeless body.
it was already morning. Ballard set up his new cave home, starting a fire and trying to get the frozen leather of his to work, and trying to warm up his frozen feet. Later, the sheriff walks down the courthouse, down the steps to the last one before the flooded lawn, looking out at the flooded town, silent, with the tops of parking meters barely visible above the water. The deputy rows up to the steps in a small boat, and the sheriff asks why he's late, to which the deputy responds that he had to give someone a speeding ticket for speeding on a motorboat. The two row their boat gently down the flooded town streets, seeing the flooded shops and cafes, along with the people salvaging what they can from the floodwaters. They enter into the flooded hardware store, and they're told by some of the salvagers inside about how people use the flood to their advantage to steal things, primarily They talk about how the town was flooded back in 1885, which submerged the entire town, and how it's burned down half a dozen times. This prompts them to wonder if there's some places that the good Lord doesn't intend them to live, such as California or Florida. They then rode their way over to the post office and get some mail from a pleasant lady. She asked them if any of the people from those cars were ever found, to which the sheriff responds, "When we find one, we'll find them all." Rowing back out, they talked to an old man about the whitecaps that used to terrorize the area, the history around them, and how a man named Tom Davis drove them out. The sheriff asks the old man if he reckons people were meaner then than they are now, to which the man responds, "No, I don't. I think people are the same from the day God first made them." What was that? What was that? Oh, God damn it, Earl!
Earl, what are you doing here? What did I tell you? This is my territory. Got it? If you keep making such a ruckus around these parts, the cops are gonna ramp up their investigations. Do you want the FBI getting involved, Earl? Do you? Shut up! Shut up, Earl. Just shut up. How many have you slaughtered, huh? How many people in my territory have you massacred? A trinity. Are you kidding me? 3? You I cannot deal with this right now. Ah.
Sorry about that. I just had to deal with a property dispute. Where were we? The next page describes Ballard watching some hawks before sitting against a rock and watching a mule-drawn wagon. Later, he wakes up in his cave to a whistling he used to hear as a boy, the whistling his father would make as he walked home. But the whistling was now nothing more than a stream flowing through the cave.
He dreamt that night that he rode through woods on a low ridge. Below him he could see deer on a meadow where the sun fell on the grass. The grass was still wet, and the deer stood in it to their elbows. He could feel the spine of the mule rolling under him, and he gripped the mule's barrel with his legs. Each leaf that brushed his face deepened his sadness and dread. Each leaf he passed, he'd never pass again. They rode over his face like veils, already some yellow, their veins like slender bones where the sun shone through them. He had resolved himself to ride on, for he could not turn back, and the world that day was as lovely as any other day that ever was, and he was riding to his
Good life.
On a good May morning, John Greer turned out to dig a septic tank at the back of his house. While he was digging, Lester Ballard in fright wig and skirts stepped out from behind the pump house and raised a and cocked the hammer silently, holding back the trigger and easing it into the notch as hunters do. When he fired, the shovel was coming past Greer's shoulder with a load of dirt. Long after the crack in the lee of the mountain, you could hear the gong of turn doom that rang above the man's head as he froze there with the shovel aloft on which had splattered in a bright medallion a small piece of lead, the man looking at whatever was standing there cursing to itself while it worked to have an apparition created whole out of nothing and set upon him with such dire intent. He flung away the body as he passed and stitched a falter in his place. He shot him once more before he rounded the corner of the house, but he could not tell where he hit him. He himself was running now, cursing steadily, working the lever of his again, taking the corner of the house, one foot almost going from under him as he turned and making a vicious slash in the mud, the now in one hand and his thumb hooked over the hammer, mounting the steps in a crazy sort of hopping gait and rushing toward the door. He looked like something come against the end of a spring-loaded tether or some slapstick contrivance of the film cutter's art, swallowed up in the door and discharged from it again almost simultaneously, ejected in an immense concussion backwards, spinning, one arm flying out in a peculiar limber gesture, a faint pink cloud of shredded clothing, the clattering soundless on the porch boards amid the uproar, and Ballard sitting hard on the floor for a moment before he pitched off into the yard. Even though Greer was through the upper chest himself, he wobbled from the doorway with his and down the steps to examine the thingy. At the foot of the steps, he picked up what appeared to be a wig and saw that it was fastened whole from a dried human scalp. Ballard dizzily wakes up in a small hospital room and tries to lift his arm, only to realize that it's missing at the shoulder. He lay there for days, eventually asking the nurse what happened to his arm, to which she just tells him she doesn't know. She asks if he even wants to know the fate of the man Ballard tried to kill, and Ballard, upon hearing that he survived, says he wishes he had
Perish.
Eventually, a group of hunters came to see him, standing beside his bedside. Some he knew, some he didn't. His heart shrank. The hunters demand to know what the bodies are and how many people he's
Alive.
Ballard denies any wrongdoing, and so the hunters abduct him while the deputy that was watching the door was temporarily gone to get the sheriff. They escort Ballard, barefoot and wearing nothing more than a hospital gown, to a pickup truck, and they drive to a house where they get Ballard some clothes. They then drive to the mountains and get out. The hunters make Ballard dress himself in the oversized clothes with one hand, and then they hike up the hill, demanding Ballard tell them where the bodies are. They continue to interrogate him, and Ballard continues to deny it all. They eventually get fed up and decide to put a cable around his neck like a leash and tie a singular arm with a rope. They walk him into an old sawmill and pull the cable up over the rafters to him. At this, Ballard cracks and tells them that he hid the bodies in caves, and he'll take the hunters to them. He takes him down into the cave that used to be his home, and the hunters give him a flashlight to lead the way. He crawls down through a short tunnel that the hunters couldn't fit through and sneaks away. The hunters, realizing what they've done, try to make their way back out of the cave, realizing they've let Lester Ballard loose. Meanwhile, Lester would try to find his own way out through the opposite end of the cave. He would go into a cycle of napping on the stone cavern floor, and then continuing on, doing this for days, surprised his flashlight battery lasted so long, but near the end he had to tap it against his leg and do that one trick where you take out the batteries and swap around the batteries just to keep it going. He'd continue on, drinking from pools of water that dripped from the ceiling of the cavern. After making his way past the bones of animals and shimmying his way over an enormous pit, he found a small cave room with a beam of daylight peering through the ceiling. It occurred to him only now that he might have passed other apertures into the upper world in the nighttime and have not known it. He put his hand up into the crevice. He pried. He scratched at the dirt. Ballard later woke in the darkness and tried to turn on his flashlight, only for it to sputter and...
You're now alive.
In the morning, when the sunlight shone through the fissure, he scratched all day with a stone or his hand. He continued doing this for days, falling asleep and waking up again just to claw at the hole. Day after day, Lester would grow madder and more panicked. Finally, Ballard managed to scrape away at the hole enough to climb out. He emerged from the hole into a field, the first thing he sees being a cow. He waits until night to climb out, makes his way along the road, weak but able. As he lies in the weeds, a church bus drives by in the darkness, and Ballard sees a boy looking out the back window. Ballard tries to remember where he knows the boy from, only to realize that the boy reminded him of himself. As dawn came, Ballard checked himself back into the county hospital. When the nurse finds him, all he says is,
I'm supposed to be here.
he was never indicted for any crime. He was sent to the state hospital at Knoxville, and there placed in a cage next door, but one to a demented gentleman who used to open folks' skulls and eat the brains inside with a spoon. Ballard saw him from time to time as they were taken out for airing, but he had nothing to say to a crazy man, and the crazy man had long since gone mute with the enormity of his crimes. The hasp of his metal door was secured with a bent spoon, and Ballard once asked if it were the same spoon the crazy man had used to eat the brains with, but he had got no answer. He contracted pneumonia in April of 1965 and was transferred to the University Hospital, where he was treated and apparently recovered. He was returned to the state hospital at Lions View when 2 mornings was found
No longer alive.
in the floor of his cage. His body was shipped to the State Medical School at Memphis. There in a basement room, he was preserved with formalin and wheeled forth to take his place with the other deceased persons newly arrived. He was laid out on a slab and flayed, eviscerated, dissected. His head was sawed open and the brains removed. His muscles were stripped from his bones. His heart was taken out. His entrails were hauled forth and delineated. And the 4 young students who bent over him like those haruspices of old perhaps saw monsters worse to come in their configurations. At the end of the 3 months, when the class was closed, Ballard was scraped from the table into a plastic bag and taken with others of his kind to a cemetery outside the city and buried there, interred. A minister from the school read a simple service. In April of that same year, a man named Arthur Ogle was plowing an upland field one evening when the plow was snatched from his hands. He looked in time to see a span of mules disappear into the earth, taking the plow with them. He crawled with caution to the place where the ground had swallowed them, but all was darkness there. A cool wind was coming from inside the earth, and far below he could hear water running. The following day, 2 neighbor boys descended into the sink on ropes. They never found the mules. What they did find was a chamber in which the bodies of a number of people were arranged on stone ledges in attitudes of repose. Late that afternoon, the high sheriff of Sevier County with 2 deputies and 2 other men crossed the field from Willie Gibson's old shop where they'd left the car and went up the old log road. They carried lanterns and coils of rope and a number of muslin shrouds on which was stenciled property of the state of Tennessee. The high sheriff of Sevier County himself descended into the sinks and surveyed the mausoleum there. The bodies were covered with adicopere, a pale and gray cheesy mold common to corpses in damp places, and scallops of light fungus grew along them as they do on logs rotting in the forest. The chamber was filled with a sour smell, a faint reek of ammonia. The sheriff and the deputy made a noose from a rope, and they slipped it around the upper body of the first corpse and drew it tight. They pulled her from the slab and dragged her across the stone floor of the vault and down a corridor to where the daylight fell against the wall of the sink. In this leaning bowl of light, standing there among the shifting motes, they called for a rope. When it descended, they made it fast to the rope about the corpse and called it aloft again. The rope drew taut, and the first of the dead sat up on the cave floor, the hands that hauled the rope above, sorting the shadows like puppeteers. Gray soapy clots of matter fell from the cadaver's chin. She ascended dangling. She sloughed in the weam of the noose. A gray room dripped. In the evening, a jeep descended by the log road, towing a trailer on the bed of which lay 7 bodies bound in muslin like enormous hams. As they went down the valley in the new fell dark, basking nighthawks rose from the dust before them with wild wings and eyes red as jewels in the headlights. Well, that's the book. It's always been a personal favorite of mine, even if our hero didn't win in the end.
But who's, you ask? What is the moral of the story? Why did you summarize the book if not to tell us what it means? Me stupid and me can't figure it out myself.
Well, we're not, sweet summer child. That's what I'm here for. Now, some might say that the point is that Lester is nobody special, a child of God, much like yourself, perhaps. But he's a deranged, violent monster. And, though not officially stated, leaving the possibility that Lester was always a monster and would have done the things he did regardless, the book heavily implies that Lester goes insane and commits the crimes he does due to isolation and his extensive history of trauma. And thus, anybody could be a Lester Ballard. Anybody could descend to the same level of madness and derangement that Lester did if pushed far enough from neglect and abuse. But I know the real meaning of the book, and that is murder is awesome. I mean, not only does it give you an unparalleled rush, but you can also get free women that you can use at any time. And the best part is, as shown by the book, they can't fight back. They'll never nag you about not doing the dishes, how you left your socks on the floor, the toilet seat up. Oh, I spend 2 hours a day at the clothing store you don't know the damn name of because you can't make a goddamn decision about what shirt you want. Also, as best said by
Edward.
John, white is trouble. Don't let these white with your head. What? Earl, again, seriously?
Jimmy, I warned you, Earl, but no, you can't listen now, can you?
Who the heck are you?
No.
Communist guy?